Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today we're talking about 10 things you don't need to waste your money on when it comes to knitting and crochet. Most of these items are used for both knitting and crochet. Some are more knitting specific, but either way, when you're getting into any new craft, you typically go on a bit of a spending spree trying to gather all the things you need. Ultimately, with knitting and crochet, all you need are your either hooks or needles and yarn. The rest you can kind of get away without having if you need to. Now, some stuff are really nice, but some stuff is just not super necessary because stuff you probably already have or other things that you purchase work better. Why have a tool that does one thing when you can have something that does multiple things instead? It's just a little bit more economic, and unless you just really love something, I don't see a point to a lot of these items. Now, I'm not saying that you can't get any of these things. Some of these are actually quite nice to have, but realistically, if you're having trouble affording stuff, or if you just want a little bit more economy with your items, these are items that you can probably afford to give a miss if you want. The first item is yarn bowls. Now, as you can see, yarn bowls come in two general categories. The one with just a hole, hello there, and the ones with a little kitty cat tail swoop. Now, these are very pretty. Like, I got this off of Etsy where somebody 3D printed this, and it's in my absolute favorite color, in case you couldn't tell. But these are awful to use as intended. So the way you do it is usually these are ideally used with a ball, and you stick the ball in here and you can put the yarn through this little crevice and then it comes out this hole. See that hole? And then you just pull from here and theoretically it keeps the yarn in the bowl so it doesn't roll all over the place. This one's a little worse because you just thread it through, so you can't take it out if you want to switch balls or anything while one ball is attached to your project. If your project doesn't fit through this hole, you're not getting it out. Same with the yarn. That's actually what I wound up doing. I've had a project with yarn in this bowl for years, and only because the yarn and the project didn't fit through the hole to get it out. Now, these work in theory really well. The problem is most of the bowls you find are this size. This one was from Hobby Lobby. My darling husband bought this for me. This one was off of Etsy, but you can see they're fairly small. They're like salad bowl size, I guess. But unless you're using only about 50 grams of yarn, these are too small. They do make larger ones that are more costly. These cost, I think, $15 a piece. Prices have probably gone up since then. And I'm going to show a little video I took right here. And sometimes if the yarn comes over the ball, you can actually still get it stuck. It doesn't necessarily mean that the ball is going to unwind smoothly. You'll still have to go over there, kind of move it. And of course, this looks a little forced because I did kind of create the situation so that this wouldn't work very well on purpose. So it's a little bit fake because of course when I went to try and record the phenomenon happening, it didn't happen. But this actually is the reason I don't like using these. Now, what I think works better, if you do have one of these, is just to have the ball in here and to pull your yarn up. That works a lot better. It doesn't get stuck on anything. Everything kind of moves. You're still less likely to have the yarn kind of pop out and roll onto the floor. It still can happen no matter what, but it's less likely, especially if you've got deeper sides. However, if you're using a yarn bowl like that, why not just use a soup bowl? Get a big soup bowl or a mixing bowl. I see some people use colanders in very much the same way where you've got the colander with all the holes in it and you stick your yarn through one of the holes. But I don't like sticking my yarn through the hole. You can still just pull it up and it works just fine. But 9 times out of 10, I don't even need a bowl because I do as much center pulling as I can. So 9 times out of 10, if I'm using just a skein of yarn, I try to pull out from the center. I'll get a little bit of yarn barf, but usually I use that up in the first knitting or crochet session. It's not a big deal. And then I'm good for the whole rest of the thing, and it'll sit right here on the couch next to me. Or if I'm using a hank of yarn, I wind it into a cake, in which case I do center pull, and it just stays there anyway. So more often than not, these are not strictly necessary. Next are project bags. So a project bag, this is actually not technically a project bag, this is a travel bag. And this is pretty awesome. It's got 4 holes on top so you can pull your yarn through. I have to find them, but it has a little divider thing that will divide into 4 even spaces, so you can have like 4 balls of Karen Simply Soft or something like that that you do the center pull from and pull them up through here. It's got a zipper to open with a pretty big inside cavern, and it's got a whole bunch of pockets and stuff on the outside. You know, you can keep stuff in there. It is nice, but here's the thing, these aren't necessary. I got this, a friend gave it to me, and I do love it because it can fit a whole lot of stuff in it when I don't have the 4 divider thing in. But here's the thing, most project bags I'm not a big fan of. If they have the scrunch closed string, I don't like that because it leaves a gap in the top where things can fall out. Most of them don't have as much structure to them as this bag, which even though it doesn't have any of the internal structural elements, is still holding its shape when I set it down. Not that you can see that. I mean, I can squish it, but even that doesn't squish too much, you see? Also, most of them don't have nearly enough pockets. And I don't really like these open pockets. I really prefer zip closed pockets so that if it falls over, because inevitably these don't have a strong base, they always fall over. And it just allows for so much mess. And that's not what you need if you're taking a project on the go, because that's the theory behind having a project bag. You have all of your project in one place and you can take it somewhere to go. You've got all of your yarn, your stitch markers, your needles, the pattern, and anything else you might need are all in one place so that you have everything for your project together. Kind of kitted up, so to speak. And that's a wonderful concept, but I find it very difficult to actually use them. They never seem to come out the way I want. Because anytime it comes out a hole, not only is it a similar problem to this where it comes out a hole and then you're stuck with the project on the outside and the yarn on the inside. Like, look at this. If you really are using 4 yarns for one project, which hole are you going to stick your project through to put it back in? Like, come on guys, you didn't think this through. And here's the thing, if you're taking projects with you on vacation, or if you're staying somewhere for the weekend, I pet sit, so often I'll take a project with me for the weekend. Just put it in your luggage with your clothes. Like, if it's clean enough for your clothes, it's clean enough for your yarn. Everything can stay together, and usually you can just get a little pouch to keep notions in. For example, I have this thing that has all of my stitch markers and darning needles. This is very convenient. I can just grab this and put it in my bag. Everything's together. Then when I get home, pull it back out. So I don't see the need for project bags. Now, I'm not saying you can't. Like on all of these, I'm not saying you can't. If you love them, go ahead and use them. I don't think most of them are in cute enough material to make it worth the extra effort of using them. Especially since I'm a pretty low maintenance knitter and crocheter. So I don't feel that it's really worth the money. unless I'm really supporting a small business owner that I love. But usually if I'm going to do that, they have more than just project bags. Maybe I'll purchase something else for them that I like a little bit more. Row counters. So row counters are little devices. The most basic form of it, I'm going to put a picture right here. This kind has 2 numbers on it. And usually it has that little loop that you can stick on your needles if you're knitting. And basically what happens is if you're knitting in the round and you come all the way around, you find it, it's marking the beginning of your round, and you can leave it on your needles and you move the number on the right up 1 because you just did 1 more round. You can also do it on your needles, so you do a row. So maybe you have it on the beginning of this needle, so you knit all the way over, and then you mark up 1, and then you knit all the way back and mark up 1. And then once you get up 9, then you can mark up 1 and then go back to 0. You've got 10, and you can keep going as many times as you need to mark what row or round you're on. It's great in concept. The problem with this style, though, is that you have to actually take your hands off of your project. So you kind of have to put it down, and then you have to use both hands, one to hold the thing and one to turn the little dial. That's a problem. Then there's little digital ones like this, and as you can see, it only has 2 little buttons. This button will turn it on, and then it'll tick it up. And then if you want to start over, you can hit this button and it brings it back to 0. I like both of these in the sense that you can start on 0, because I like to knit around and then count it as 1. But the problem with this kind is that you only get 1 number. So if you want to knit rows or rounds, and then you also want to keep track of repeats, you need another one of these. And that can be problematic because these are theoretically supposed to be able to go on a finger, but they're very uncomfortable. You know, this is cheap shit plastic. I got a pack of 4 of these on Amazon. They're all different colors and they work just fine, but they're not really comfortable to have on there. The cool thing is you can just hold your needles in one hand, press the button, and then keep going, and it's not that big of a deal. It's not a full stop every time. But it's also not comfortable, and you need an extra one if you want to do extra stuff and keep track of different things. You can also get a row counter app. And some things like Knit Companion will allow you to keep track of patterns and stuff. They also have row and repeat counters that you can set up. There are also apps that are just row counters. One of the problems I don't like about those is that I like to make it so that my phone screen turns off after a certain amount of time to save battery. It will dim and darken, and then you have to get your screen back on before you can actually count your row or repeat. I do this because if you leave your screen on constantly, it really wears down your battery really quickly. You get like half the battery length, and if you're already at 35% battery, this will just decimate it in like half an hour. Also, I don't like the fact that most of them start on 1. So it says 1 and then you knit round 1 and then you mark it up for round 2, and it tells you which one you're supposed to be doing. So I always have to put it backwards to 0 so that I can do round 1, then count round 1. I realize I'm weird and different, but it's not comfortable. But do you know what actually works for me 100% of the time? Pen and paper. Because I can set it right here on the arm of my thing. When I'm knitting, I can put both needles in one hand, pick this up, make a quick mark, set it down. Pencils are awesome, especially mechanical ones, because they won't roll away so easily. And then I can continue going. And here's the cool thing. You can do any style you want in your tally marks. So like I do tally marks for socks. So I'll have cuff, leg, heel, and I'll say which heel I'm doing so that if there's something special I need to do, I can do it. It's usually an FLK heel, so I just say FLK and I move on. And then foot, and then toe. And this way I don't have to worry, and I have all of my marks here. Then I just do a little line down, and for the second sock, I can make sure that round by round they are exactly the same. Makes it super easy. Also really easy to do arms on sweaters. That's exactly what I did on this sweater, which is the Mountain Mist by Tin Can Knits. So that way you can make sure they're identical. It's a way of note taking as well as keeping track of exactly where you are in your pattern. And if you don't have any like special pads of paper, I got this off of Amazon. You could do it in your paper patterns. You can do it on printer paper. You can do it on construction paper. You can do it on Post-it notes. Anything that works for you. And here's the cool thing. Because it's a pad, I can stick it in my bag or anything and it travels really well. Mechanical pencils are pretty cheap, and when they run out, you just put in more lead. No big deal. You don't have to even carry around a sharpener. So I'm old school that way. I'm also a kinesthetic learner, so physically marking stuff, I'm more likely to actually keep track of where I am versus having to recount how many rows or rounds I've done. Oh, and one thing that happens a lot on sleeve patterns in particular is you'll have one decrease round, and then you'll have like 5 rounds or something knitting evenly, depending on your size, the style, and whatnot. So then what I do is I just mark 1 for the decrease round. I have a little mark here marking a space, and then I do my 5. And because I read tallies really quickly, I know this is my full entire repeat. Then I go to the next line and I do it again. And I can number them 1, 2, 3, 4, however many I need. And that's how I know how to do it. Then I can have a mark at the end that, say, for example, this one, I wound up with 13 extra rounds that I wound up knitting even. So then I put 13 down here. And I know that next time I have 13 even. You can write as many notes or as few notes as you need. So it's not just tallies, it's any note keeping you need for something that you're doing. The next is cable needles. Now there's 2 basic shapes for cable needles. This is one, and then there's the kind that looks like a J. I'll put a picture right here. Both of these suck. They can be made out of metal, they can be made out of plastic. And no matter what, I always drop stitches when I use these, because theoretically on this type, you put the needles that you're going to either pull forward or push backward right here. Theoretically it stays, but, well, it works well on my finger. When you have just 1 or 2 stitches on here, this thing will just fall off real quick and easy. And it's so much smaller than pretty much any needle you're going to be using, except maybe size 1. So your stitches aren't holding it there. Plus, both plastic and metal are very slick. Now, the J-style ones do hang off of your stitches very well, but getting them out of that J can be a little tricky, and it's still thin and slippery, and they're very likely to fall out. I don't like them. Do you know what I like instead? Cheap shit wooden DPNs. Because here's the thing with the wooden DPN. You can get the size you need, the same size as the needles you're working with. Put your stitches on there, push it forward and back. Because it's wood, the wood kind of grabs the yarn a little bit, especially if you're a tighter knitter like me, and that thing is not falling out. It's a little longer, it might be a little bit more awkward, but all you have to do is like push it out of the way with your thumb or your fingers, and you're fine. Then you can just knit off of it, and your stitches aren't going to be stretched, they're not going to be loose, you're not going to lose them. It's much better in my opinion. And the cool thing is you can get this set that I got. I think they're you got size 2 through like 10 or 15. And there's 5 needles in each set for 15 bucks. They are cheap. They are complete shit. I do not recommend them if you're a DPN user, but if you're knitting cables, this is the way to go. It is so much easier. The next item is stitch holders. Oh my gosh, I hate these. And the thing is, there's so many different kinds. So there are, again, pictures. So there are a kind of stitch holder that looks like a giant diaper pin. And they are nasty they're meant for holding like stitches when you're putting something on hold and you'll come back to it later, like sleeves in a sweater. The problem is that like if you have 50 to 100 stitches for a sleeve, you gather them up, they're really scrunched in on this thing and it pulls. Because you usually have a gap right here, it will pull these. So this part and that part stretch. So you're more likely to have a weird hole in your armpit because those stitches are stretched. They're better if you're doing something flat, like for example, if you are knitting the back and you put these stitches on hold right here for this shoulder, you bind off these stitches and then you start working down the front of a vest, for example. That is a great use for them because they're usually long enough that they're not really pulling anything here. Another kind of stitch holder is like a DPN holder. It's a tube with another tube that goes in and out, and they've got a hole in the middle so that your DPNs can go into the tube, but your project hangs out of the little slit. And then you close it and it will hold your DPNs. This is kind of akin to the construction cone kind. And these just stick onto the tip of your needle. They come in various sizes, and if they're not squishy, remember they need to be squishy because the squishy softness is actually what kind of grips your needle so they don't fall off. The thing is, you can push into these too hard that you can totally, if you have sharp needles, poke a hole all the way through. And some people have a lot of trouble with these, especially if they get hard. They don't grip very well and they can fall off your needle. But here's the thing, you shouldn't need anything to keep your stitches on your needle. You want to know why? I'll show you why. This is actually bigger than my needles. You can see how it's all bunched up there? But here's the trick. Hold both ends together. Pull your project down. These are not falling off. This is perfectly safe. You can actually have a lot of stitches on your needles. Typically, if you're doing a 23-inch hat on 16-inch needles, you can still really pull your fabric through, so you have a lot of extra space. Now I can, if I want, stab my project into my ball and it's all held together. Nice and neat, and this shit ain't coming apart. No need for stitch holders at all. And if you're putting your sleeves onto hold or something, you can either use some waste yarn, which isn't my favorite thing, or what I really like to do, because I have interchangeable needle sets, you can put a cord in through there and just have the little stoppers on the cord that you screw in. And then you just take the needles and put them on the cord and you can knit straight from there. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Next is bobbins. Now there are little like plastic bobbin things. There's little bobbin clips. There's little bobbin ways to do bobbins for if you're doing like different kinds of color work things where you have one color here, a different color here, and a third color, or return to color one here. You don't need any of that. First of all, it makes your yarn a little bit heavier. so that when you have it hanging down the back, it kind of pulls a little bit of weight, which can affect the tension on your stitches. You can really easily make your own bobbins. There are better tutorials for this, but basically you hold it in your fingers kind of like this, and then you go and make a butterfly. You do this as long, as you need. And then what you do is you pull it off, hold it, and you loop. And then here's the cool thing, this piece that you're holding, you just pull it out as you need. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. And you can make these as big or as little as you need for your project. And because there's no extra weight, they just dangle and it's no big deal. They might get a little loose towards the end, but usually at that point, if they just kind of dangle, it's usually fine. Gauge rulers. Okay, so these aren't complete junk. It's probably a good idea to have one gauge ruler, just because sometimes crochet hooks or knitting needles, the size will wear off, or like the chow goos where they're etched in, but they're not like a different color from the stainless steel. It gets really hard to see. You know, you can just poke them through. Apparently my pinky is 10 millimeter needle. This one came with chow goo. I think I wound up with getting this one with a kit of some kind, like a beginner knitting kit or something. You don't have to get one of these though, especially if you can easily read the sizes on your knitting needles and your crochet hooks. What's real junk though is this, because okay, this is really supposed to be used for when you swatch. So what you're supposed to do is once you have your little 6-inch swatch, you put this and lay this on there, and then you can count for 2 inches, and 2 inches you can do stitches and you can do rows at the same time. The problem is this is 2 inches. You're supposed to measure 4 inches because that way you get a better aggregate. Because if in 2 inches you end on a quarter stitch, it becomes one of those difficult things. Do you just round down? How do you count that? Is that a half? It's very iffy. Versus when you've got it over 4 inches, you can have a rounding error and it's not that bad. Yes, you can use the inches or the centimeters at the top or the bottom, but here's the thing, this is a specialty device, and if you don't need the little gauge thing, you know what you can use instead? Tape measure. You can just use a tape measure, and these are far more handy. You can measure your needle with this. You can figure out the weight of a yarn by wrapping your yarn around this and finding your wraps per inch. You can lay it for stitches, you can lay it for rows. It's not that hard to use. You can line it up however you need to. You can also actually measure yourself. Bust, waist, hips, inner leg, inner arm, shoulder, neck, like anything you need to measure on your body. Foot measurements, you can measure with this. It is very handy to have a good one. And if you get one of these, it's got a button right here. Haha, that's fun to do. Do not give these to children. They will break it. All right, second to last one, sock blockers. So this is a sock specific thing, but here's the thing with sock blockers. Socks stretch to your feet. Unless you're really trying to like show off a sock pattern because you made a sock pattern and you're trying to sell it, or if you're giving socks as a gift to somebody, you might want to have it blocked out all nice and kind of sideways. You do not need to actually do this, especially if you're making just socks for your family. Because socks are knit about 10% smaller than the foot they're supposed to go on, they stretch to fit. So blocking them doesn't really help with fit or anything because the foot becomes the blocker. So I don't find I need to do that for aesthetic reasons. I do have a sock pattern that I made and it is available in my Etsy shop, but I use my own feet because I feel that showing something off on a real foot shows what it'll actually look like on somebody else's feet. I don't feel that they're super necessary. And the final thing is related. You don't need blocking mats at all. I do have a video linked in the description that can show you how I block in a tight space where I don't have a lot of room. But ultimately, you could be a person who wants to block a garment to measurements. You can tell I haven't blocked this. I just finished it yesterday and I'm very proud. But, you know, blocking might make this look a little bit nicer and a little less, you know. You don't need special equipment for this. I often block on towels, which is nice because when the towel gets wet, you can switch it out for a dry towel. I know some people block on plastic bags. I know some people get those children's mats that they can play on. Sometimes they're like puzzle shaped. People get those because they're the exact same thing as a blocking mat and they are cheaper and much more widely available. And some people use cardboard and thumbtacks. The one thing I would suggest is making sure that whatever you're using as a pin is not going to rust. So getting those rust-free T-pins that are in your sewing department of your local craft store, you know, that's worth an investment, and it still costs a lot less than a lot of those specialty blocking mats that can cost hundreds of dollars. I don't see the need for it. Now, there are two items that I do find very useful. One is scissors. Now, scissors don't have to be fancy scissors. You don't have to get the cute little scissors that are for cutting thread. They cut very well on yarn, but you don't have to get those. Honestly, most of the time with yarn, regular kitchen scissors or shears or whatever just work. I wouldn't use those on paper afterwards because that will deaden them faster, but you know, just get some reasonably sharp scissors and you're good. Another thing is stitch markers. You don't have to buy stitch markers, but professionally made ones I do notice work better than if you're using paper clips or thread of a different color like waste yarn or something. Just because it actually, you know, especially if you're knitting and you want your stitch markers to be in the same place on your needles, it really works better to have something that goes on your needles. I really like the ones that came with my ChowGoo. These are perfect little circles, but you can also make them. All you need is a jump ring and a bead, and you can make your own. I got this idea from some that I bought. These are for very small needles. It's based on this one that I bought. You can also make them in different ways. I think somebody handmade these where they're a bead and then they're a little loop. And if you're a crocheter, or if you need to be able to measure a length from a certain place, I made this one. I poured the resin and then I put it on a little earring. See if you can see that. There you go. So, I mean, I could wear this in my ear. It's not clean, I'm not going to. But this can actually go very nicely into a stitch. Ta-da! And now it's a pin, because if you forget to take it off, it's just a pin. Or if you're trying to mark something, like I used one like this. I used this one, which is from Ken Knits. And it has a little clasp for like a necklace. And I use that to mark the back of this sweater, the center back on the neck, because I put a tag in here. And that told me exactly where, when I was ready to do the tag, exactly where I needed to put the tag. And I was able to do it. And now I have a tag in the back of my sweater that says back. And I know some people don't like these, but I do like this kind, because you just put it in and you twirl it around, and then it will mark something. These are really good if you're like casting on a certain number of stitches. You can put them on your needles, or if you're doing a starting chain, you can stick it in one of the loops on one of your chains so you can count intervals a little bit better. So I do like these. I know these aren't very popular. Now, you do not need a lot of stitch markers. I have a lot because somehow I managed to accumulate them. I have literally purchased 3 of these sets of stitch markers, and they are the 3 main ones that I use. It is something, if you find one you like, making sure you have that type of stitch marker on hand. I do think that one is worth the investment, because they come in so handy for marking your place, marking repeats, the beginning and end of a repeat, row counting, repeat counting, lots of stuff that you can actually use them for. So I think that's one of the handier investments. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. Happy crafting. Like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. Bye.